The Greek gods. Athene. Zeus was strolling on Olympus one morning and noticed a new maiden walking in his garden. She was Metis, a Titaness daughter of one of his old enemies, but the war was long ago and she was beautiful. He charged down the slope after her. She turned into a hawk and flew away. He turned into a hawk and flew after. She flew over the lake and dived in and became a fish. He became a fish and swam after her. She climbed on the bank and became a serpent and wriggled away. He changed himself into a serpent and wriggled after and caught her. After he left her, he heard a bird cry and a fish leap, and those wild sounds combined to become a prophecy which the rattling leaves echoed. O Zeus, Metis will bear a child, a girl child, but if she bears again, it will be a son who will dispose you as you disposed Kronos. The next day, Zeus walked in his garden again and found Metis there. This time, she did not flee. He spoke softly to her and smiled. She came to him. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and swallowed her. That afternoon, he suffered a headache, the worst headache that anyone, god or mortal, had suffered since the beginning of time. It was exactly as if someone were inside him with a spear, thrusting at all the soft places in his head. He shouted for Hephaestus, who came rushing up with a hammer and wedge, and Zeus put his head on the anvil, and Hephaestus split the mighty skull. Then he leaped back, frightened, because out of the head sprang a tall maiden in armor, holding a long spear. This was Athene, the gray-eyed, the wide-browed. The manner of her birth gave her domain over intellectual activities. It was she who taught man how to use tools. She taught him to invent the axe, the plow, the ox yoke, the wheel, and the sail. She taught his wife to spin and weave. She concocted the science of numbers and taught it to man, but never to women. She hated Ares and took great pleasure in thwarting him on the field of battle. For all his mighty strength, she often beat him, because she was a mistress of strategy. Before battle, captains prayed to her for tactics. Before trial, judges prayed to her for wisdom. It was she who stated that the compassion was the best part of wisdom. The other gods didn't know what she meant by this, but some men understood and were grateful. All in all, she was perhaps the best-loved god in the pantheon. The people of Athens named their beautiful city after her. There are many stories about Athene, about her skill in battle, her wisdom, and her kindness. But like the other gods, she was also very jealous. One of the best stories is that of Athene. Athene was a young girl who lived in Lydia, famous for its purple dye. Her joy was weaving, and she wove the most beautiful things anyone had ever seen. Cloaks so light you could not feel them about your shoulders, but warmer than fur. Tapestries wrought with patterns so marvelous that birds would fly through the window and try to eat the cherries off the woven bough. She was a very young girl, and everyone praised her, and soon she began to praise herself, and she said, I am the greatest weaver in all the world, the greatest since the world began, no doubt. In fact, I can weave better than Athene herself. Athene heard this, of course, and the gods are very quick to hear criticism and very swift to act. So she came to earth, to the little village where Athene lived. The girl was inside spinning. She heard a knock at the door and opened it. And there stood a lady so tall, so sternly beautiful, that Athene knew she must be a goddess, and she was afraid she knew which one. She fell on her knees. Far above her head she heard a voice speaking softly, saying terrible things. Yes, miserable girl, I am Athene. I am the goddess you have mocked. Is there any reason I should not kill you? Athene shook her head. Weeping, she could not answer. Very well, said Athene. Prepare yourself for death. You have defied the gods and must die. Then Athene stood up and said, Before I die, great Athene, let me give you a present. She went in and took a lovely cloak she had woven and gave it to her and said, Take this cloak. It must often get cold up high on Olympus. This will shield you from the wind. Please take it. I am sure you have nothing so fine. Athene shook her head and said, Poor child, you are being destroyed by your own worth. Your talent has poisoned you with pride like the sting of a scorpion. So that which makes beauty brings death, but it is his handsome cloak, and I appreciate the gift. I will give you one chance. You have boasted that you can spin and weave better than I. Then I, who invented the loom and the spinning wheel, the distaff and the spindle, and out of the fleece of the clouds wove the first counterpart for my father, Zeus, who likes to sleep warm, and dyed it with the colors of the sunset? But you say you can weave better than I? Very well, you shall have a chance to prove it, and your own village shall judge. 7 days from today we shall meet. You will set your spinning wheel in that meadow, and I shall be in my place, and we shall have a contest, and you will weave what you will, and I shall do so too. Then we will show what we have done, and the people will judge. If you win, I shall withdraw the punishment. If you lose, it is your life. Do you agree? Oh, yes, said Arcanine. Thank you, dear goddess, for sparing my life. It is not yet spared, said Athene. The word flashed from village to village, and when the time came, not only Arcanine's neighbors, but all the people in the land had gathered in the great meadow to watch the contest. Arcanine's house was the last in the village, and faced the great meadow, and she had set up her loom outside the door. Athene sat on a low, flat hill overlooking the field. Her loom was as large as Arcanine's cottage. The girl went first, and at the sight of her sitting spinning there in the sunlight, the crowd pushed in so close she hardly had room to work. Her white hands danced among the flax, and she worked so quickly, so deftly, that she seemed to have forgotten the loom and to be weaving in the air. Swiftly and more swiftly she tapped on the wool with her fingers, making it billow and curl, then rolling it into a ball, then shaking it out again, and staining the wool into long shining threads with quick little pokes of her thumb at her spindle. It was said that her working was as beautiful as her work, and when she was told that, she always smiled and said, "It is the same thing." So she wove, and the people watched. And then the finished cloth began to come from the loom, and everybody laughed to see, for they were joyous scenes, morning scenes, a little boy and a little girl running in a green field among yellow flowers, chased by a black dog, a maiden at a window dreamingly combing her hair, a young man watching the sea, counting the waves, and later in a purple dusk, that same young man and girl standing under a tree looking at each other. Swiftly and more swiftly the white hands danced between loom and spindle. She wove bouquets of flowers for the wedding, and a wedding gown for the bride, and a gorgeous cloak for the young husband. And remembering what Athene had said before, she spun a counterpane for their bed. Each square, not a block of color, but a little picture, one from the childhood of the man and one from the childhood of the bride, and all together mixing as their memories would mix now. The counterpane was last, and when she rose and snapped it out, the people gasped and laughed and wept with joy. And Arcane curtsied toward the low hill, and Athene began to spin. The goddess had conjured up a flock of plum-white woolly clouds about her hilltop, so she did not have a comb fleece or draw thread. She used cloud wool, the finest stuff in all the world, and she dyed it with the colors of the dawn and the colors of the sunset, with the colors of the sheep and the colors of the storm. Now that the whole western part of the sky was her loom, she flung great tapestries across the horizon, scenes from Olympus, things that mortal men have never hoped to see, almost too terrible to see. Kronos cutting up Uranus with a scythe, Zeus charging along the firmament with his 100-handed ones, shattering the Titans, the binding of Zeus, the punishment of Hera, Zeus chasing Metis as a hawk and fish and snake, then the birth of Athene herself springing from Zeus's broken head. Then more quiet scenes, Athene teaching the arts to man, teaching him to plow, to sail, to ride in chariots, teaching the woman to spin, and then finally muddling it all up, poking her long spindle among the woven clouds and mixing them and stirring up a dark, strange picture, the future of man. Man growing huge and monstrous, his trees turning to spikes, his fields to stone, swollen and dropsical with pride, building something so loathsome he had to look away while he was making it. This was too much for the multitude. The vast crowd fell on its knees and wept. Arcanine was watching, and she had never moved from the time Athene had started to work, but stood there straight with pale face and glittering eyes, watching. And when the people fell on their knees, she turned and went away. She walked quietly to a grove of trees, and there took a rope and hanged herself. Athene came down from the hill, and she spoke no word to the people, who dispersed. Then she went to the grove and saw Arcane hanging there. The girl's face was black. Her eyes were bulging. Her hair was streaming. Athene reached her long arms and touched the girl on the shoulder. The face grew blacker and the eyes bulged more. The body shrank. The arms and legs dwindled and multiplied. Then Athene touched the rope, and it shriveled, growing thinner and thinner until it was a frail, shining strand, and there at the end of the shining silken hair swung a small, hairy creature with many legs. It looked at Athene, then turned and scuttled up its thread, drawing it up as it climbed. It floated away over the grass until it came to a low bush and cast another loop and sat there practicing, for it knew that now it was meant to spin without rivalry until the end of time. That is why spiders are called arachnids by those who know them best. And that is the end of the story of Athene.